Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from May 10th, 2024, and I'm recording this on November 7th, 2024. I always give you those dates so you know when this information is actually most relevant because the market is always moving and changing. And also, as always, we're looking back at CBSI. Oh, my chair. CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Town Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. We use those two lists as kind of a guide of what people were chasing in the moment, what books were hot, what books were moving or jumping in value. And we look back 6 months later to see how they've performed in the market since, so we can understand what factors were affecting them then and how they're affecting the book now. So we make a little better decision when we chase the hot book of the moment. And, you know, should we be patient? Should we jump in and see if we can make good decisions with our money? So with that, we got 14 books to talk about this week. So we had a lot of overlap between the two lists, 6 books overlapping. But let's dig in, see if we can learn anything. First up, we have Blood Hunt, the Red Band edition, number 1, the Linnell Francis Yu 1 in 25. This is, of course, the crime suspense stories homage here. And this was on the list last week at like $50 to $80. By this point, it was $200 to $300 with a 9.8 pre-sale going for $6. It took a huge leap between week 1 and week 2 of when this came out. We talked about this last week, but it was still kind of up compared to week 1. Well, not so much when you look at compared to week 2, because now it's a $50 to $130 book. 9.8, $130 to $200. Yeah, that's dumpster fire all over it. The craziness that went on with this book. There was enough of them that really kind of the market just could not support those kind of crazy prices we got to back in the spring. Still a cool homage, obviously, and still a cover that's going for really good value. 1 in 25 that's going for $50 to $130 this much after, and almost $200 for a 9.8 is great performance on a book like that. But yeah, if you bought in on week 2, that week 2 bump we talk about a lot of times, it just wasn't sustainable. All right, next we have Armory Wars, God Apollo, I'm Burning, Star 4, Volume 2. Yes, that's all part of this title. But this is really just about the Tula Lotte 1 in 40 cover, which is an odd ratio, not a 1 in 50, not a 1 in 10, not a 1 in 25, a 1 in 40. Occasionally you get some of these other outlets will do some weird ratios. This one was going for 50 to 60, so just barely above ratio back then. Now it's, well, one sale. I can only find one sale. $30. And yeah, so this is a trap. No reason to have chased it back then. Not many of them on the market, but just, yeah, not going for those kind of values as back then. All right, next. So those were only 2 we didn't have any option news this week, at least non-Marvel DC. We didn't, and those were the only 2 covers. So this was a lot of comic buzz and a lot of XMen 97 as we dig into this list a little further. First up, we have Spider-Woman number 7 of the comic buzz, I should say. First up of that, Spider-Woman number 7. The A cover was on the list last week because it was the first appearance of the Assembly, which is actually going to become the new Champions team. But this was the Peach Momoko variant, just the regular variant. There is also a version of this that was like a 1 in 100, I believe. But this is just a regular variant. Raw copies were going for $20 to $30 back then. Now it's a $5 to $20 book. Look, few sales still going up to 20. 9.8, 60 to 90. So also a trap though, because most of the sales are like 10, and not that 20 to 30 kind of range that it was going for back there on the raw copies. So a decent Peach cover, but I'm not a huge Peach fan, and this is not one of her better ones, I don't think, but it's a decent one. All right, next we have something very odd. We have 3 books in a row that are all free comic book day books. We had 3 free comic book day books hit the list. None of them were on both lists, but they were on, or there were different ones on each of the lists, I should say, but none of them doubled up. First up, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the free comic book day 2024. This is the first appearance of Raphael as Night Watcher, so I guess he was kind of going off on his own and had some new superhero identity. I don't know what was going on here. I didn't read this, but anyway, $4 to $10 for what was a free book. Is a pretty good return for one of these free comic book day books. Now it's a $1 to $5 book. It's basically, give me a couple couple bucks to offset the eBay fees and the shipping, and I'll send it to you. That's basically what that means. 9.8, 40 to 50, just barely above what it costs to actually get the book slabbed. So definitely a down, and I'll be back. There was no reason to chase this book. You can still get it for very, very cheap. Obviously more than what you would have paid if you'd been to Free Comic Book Day, which was nothing, but a very cheap book. Next, we have Inon Universe, the 2024 special Free Comic Book Day, and this is the first appearance of Slizlardo, some character in the new Inon Transformers books. Anyway, $4 to $8 back then. Now again, a 1 to 5, 40 to 50, almost the exact same prices here as that last book. Very cheap. We'll call this one down, and I'll be back. Just like we did before. No reason to have chased it in the moment. You can still find these for basically what it costs to cover like the eBay fees plus shipping. Next, we have Conan, Battle of the Blackstone, Free Comic Book Day 2024, and this is a prequel to what was going to be an upcoming event in the Conan books. I don't read Conan, and I don't know if this was a good event or if people liked it or what. But back then it was a $5 book. 9.8 though went for $157. And I made a comment. Well, I said I'll be back on the raw, but that's a dumpster fire on the 9.8. We'll get to that in a second. Raw copies $1 to $8 now. 9.8, 45. So yes, exactly what I said. No reason to chase the raw copies in the moment, but yeah, dumpster fire on that 9.8 because it's a third of the value now. All right, with that, we have one DC related book this week, and that is, and it was on both lists, DC 1 Million, #1, the first appearance of Solaris. And this hit the list because we had the photo of Superman's new costume for the new movie, and in the background he had this like odd looking sun in the sky, which people were assuming is Solaris. So that's why they were jumping on this book back then. $3 to $10 is all it was going for. This is a heavily printed book. It didn't really jump very high, but it did go in there. It was, lots of sales. Now it's a $1 to $8 book. Still very, very cheap. We'll still call this a down, and I'll be back because, again, just no reason to have gone after it. Next, we're moving into MCU, and we have Fantastic Four number 49. First full appearance of Galactus. Obviously, last week we talked about 48. This week we're talking about 49. Obviously, this is a classic Silver Age Marvel key. A very important book. 6.0 back then was hitting 6.30. That was really... Tom put the average on that one at like 4K, and I don't know why I didn't get in my notes a actual raw average for books back then. But raw sales on this vary greatly depending on condition, of course. I mean, you can get a really low grade copy for $150. There was a really nice high grade copy that went for $26.50. Most of the sales though are like kind of mid-grade stuff is you're looking at like $400 to $100 to $1,000 for like lower to mid-grade kind of thing. So, but yeah, steady and worth it on this. I said straight cash, but really it's been pretty steady and worth it. Stayed kind of in that same range. You can say the 6.0s are up just a little bit, 650 to 750 compared to 630 back then, but it's right kind of there. So we just went with steady and worth it. Next, we have Incredible Hulk number 180, the first appearance of Wolverine. Don't at me. He's in the book. Deal with it. It's just not the cover that you want. An 8.0 back then was going for $1,000. Tom had the average at 2.1K. Again, for some reason, I normally go in and look at raw sales, and I didn't write them down. So I don't know exactly what raws were going for because those averages obviously are wrong. If an 8.0 is going for $1,000. Raw copies right now, 150 to 1,000 depending on condition. 8.0 set 975 to 1,025. So literally wrapping around that 1,000 number. So we're going to again call it steady and worth it. No reason to have chased in that moment, but obviously long-term great book. Next we have Nightcrawler number 1. And obviously we're into XMen 97 at this point. I think the Wolverine book was because there was stuff about Deadpool, but now we're fully into X-Men 97 stuff, and we have Nightcrawler number 1, first solo series for Nightcrawler, and obviously him with the swords. We got the great scene in the animated series with him fighting with the swords. Back then, this was going for $6, 9.8, 80 to 130. Now it's a $3 to $12 book raw, so basically the same price, but 9.8, and there's multiple sales. Like there's not 10, but there's like 5+ sales recently of 9.8s between 175 and 250. So that's up and worth it. If the raw copies had bumped up also, I would have said straight cash, but the 9.8s just bumped up, so we just went with up and worth it. But yeah, it's definitely climbed in value on those 9.8s. Next, we have X-Men 97 #1. This was the prequel to the relaunch of the series. So they put out a prequel comic. Raw copies were going for $15 to $25 as the series was wrapping up at this point. 9.8s were going for $60 to $160, and now it's a $5 to $25 book. 9.8, $40 to $100. So yeah, down in and I'll be back. Borderline, almost trapped, but we went with I'll be back on this one. But yeah, the 9.8s are both. I said $40 to $100, but most of the 9.8 sales are like $90 to $100. But there were like 2 that were people got deals on. So we went with all. That's why we went with an I'll be back as opposed to a trap. Next, we have X-Men number 53, the first appearance of Onslaught. This was on the list last week for basically the relatively the same price, a little bit higher this week, as it was 15 to 30 as opposed to like 10 to 15, 9.8, 115 to 150 as opposed to like 100 last week. And now it's a $1 to $15 book, 9.8, 100 to 150 still. We're going to call it down, and I'll be back because the vast majority of the sales are on the raw side, and it has taken a step back there. But 9.8s are staying in that 100+ kind of range. All right, let me see. What do we got left? We got 2 books left, and we have Wolverine number 75. And this is the reveal that Wolverine's claws are actually like bone at the core as opposed to just pure metal. We didn't know that till 1993. And so this was a big event at the time. I remember like a lot of people talking about this. Raw copies of this were going for $10. 9.8 was going for $100. If you can't tell why, might have been a little bit of this going on in the actual show. No spoilers, I guess. Raw copies now 5 to 15, 50 to 70 for a 9.8. So that's a trap on the 9.8. And really, like, so we maybe could have went with I'll be back on the raw copies. But most of the raw sales were around 5 and not up toward 15. But so definitely a book that's going back kind of where it was as opposed to what it was going for during the show. And then last book we're going to talk about this week is X-Men number 25, the moment that leads to that reveal, Magneto removing Wolverine's adamantium. Yeah, we did get that in the show as well. Raw copies 15 to 20 back then, 9.8, 120 to 160. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, 9.8, 120 to 150 now. So 9.8's again kind of like that not the Nightcrawler book, but the X-Men 53, 9.8 sitting in the same range they were, but the raw copies have definitely taken a big step back. So a down and an I'll be back on this particular book. And that's it, because all of those last 4 X-Men books were on both lists. So we only had 14 books. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me again this week. I want to thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time. Later.